They say betrayal doesn't shout at whispers. It slips into your home wearing a smile, hugs you goodnight. And one morning, while the coffee still steams and your guard is still asleep, it drops the final knife. I used to believe in quiet mornings, the kind where sunlight filters through curtains like soft forgiveness, and the world starts slow, safe, familiar. But familiarity is a disguise. It can cover rot. Beneath fresh paint can hide truth in routine. That's what I learned the day my husband handed me a stack of papers with my name on them. Only this time they weren't love letters. They were legal declarations that I no longer belonged. My name is Celia, and on that morning, I wasn't heartbroken, I was reborn. He didn't even sit down. Just laid the papers flat on the kitchen counter, the marble catching the tremble in his fingers. 20 years of marriage, and that was how it ended. Like a business deal wrapped in silence and signatures. But the betrayal didn't burn because of him. It burned because of who stood behind him. Tessa, my best friend. My shadow for half a lifetime. My mistake. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't need to. Her hand already rested on his arm like she had always belonged there. I didn't cry. There are certain betrayals that travel beyond grief. This was one of them. He said words like distance, like inspiration, like you've changed. But they were just decorations around the real truth he had made his choice long ago. He just didn't have the courage to confess it until she gave him permission. I made no scene, no pleading, no questions. I simply walked upstairs. In my office was a drawer that no one ever asked about, not once. Inside was a hard drive, black, discreet, and powerful. Not because of what it looked like, but because of what it held. 10 years of my life. My ideas. My worlds. Things he never cared to ask about. Contracts, drafts, copyrights. The unseen part of me, the part that never needed him to exist. I placed it into my tote bag like someone placing a crown back on their head. You see, while they whispered behind my back, I was building something with every hour they ignored me. While he dismissed my projects as cute or therapeutic, I was signing contracts with international publishers. While she borrowed my lipstick and left wine stains on my wine glasses, I was registering trademarks. While they thought I was wasting time, I was creating legacy. There's something deliciously ironic about being underestimated. It gives you cover. You can grow entire empires behind the curtain of dismissal. And when the curtain lifts, they don't see your tears. They see your throne. That morning before I left, I passed by an old photograph. The three of us. On a beach I planned at a resort I paid for using a camera I had saved up to buy. It was framed in silver. I took it down and placed it on the dining table. A souvenir. A reminder. You keep this, I'll keep everything else. As I opened the front door, he called after me. If you fall into financial trouble, I might still be able to help. I paused, turned halfway, and said the first truth of the day. You think I've been surviving on your charity? I was living on vision. You mistook silence for dependence, but you never knew what silence was feeding. Then I left, and in that moment, I wasn't broken. I was dangerous. We met when we were young, when compliments felt like lifelines and promises weren't yet debts. I was the girl with ink-stained fingers and stories in my head. He was the polished campaigner with the gift of timing. We were opposites, but I mistook his confidence for depth. He told me I made art that adults paused for. I thought he meant it. Maybe he did, back then. And Tessa, she was always a storm dressed like springtime. People called her magnetic, but I knew it was gravity. Beautiful things sometimes pull others to their ruin. We were roommates. She borrowed my clothes, then my trust, then my peace. She once crossed a line and cried so hard I thought it meant something. I forgave her, too fast. I called it grace. Now I know it was amnesia, the kind we choose to survive. Years passed. We got older, earned titles, built families, or pretended to. She showed up in every chapter somehow, like a recurring character I didn't write but couldn't erase. When she got divorced, I let her stay with us for a week. It became 2 months, then four. She brought drama like perfume light but lingering. I should have said no, but women like me are taught to host our own undoing with hospitality. I remember the first time I saw her in my silk robe. The robe wasn't the crime, it was the way she laughed, the way his eyes lingered for a second too long. A flicker. But flickers start fires. I didn't confront her because I don't confront. I calculate. I remember. I document. Some women shout. I don't. I watch. I watched her walk through my house like she already belonged. I watched him become more absent in my presence and more present in her absence. They thought I didn't notice. They thought loyalty makes you blind. But it doesn't. It makes you silent until it's time. I remembered something else from years ago, an anonymous message telling me not to choose him, a glitch in our shared laptop that wiped chat logs clean. Back then, I accepted her shrug, her easy lies. Now I realize betrayal doesn't start when someone cheats. It starts when you believe they never could. The day I left my house, I didn't leave in pieces. I left prepared. I had already transferred assets, rewritten my wills, restructured accounts. My name, my real name, the one they never thought to Google, had been signed on publishing deals in 12 countries. Mara V. Hull, that was me. I had founded my own studio, bought real estate in 3 states, built passive income channels. I'd been building not just art, but ownership. My net worth 3.7 million, all in my name. Legal, unassailable. I never needed his validation. I needed his absence. When Brandon had withdrawn $60,000 to help Tessa launch a spa, I didn't argue. I used the same amount as a down payment on the very house they were now living in. Not owning, leasing. From me. The eviction was swift. 72 hours. A studio they thought was a gift from life. It was mine, signed, sealed, and managed by a shell company they never noticed. Poetic justice isn't loud. It's a whisper returned to its sender. And when the phone rang again and again, I let it. When Tessa finally got through, her voice was soaked in old tricks, tears, trembling, apologies. I didn't entertain it. I let her speak until she slipped, until her second face emerged. You're just a bitter woman with too much money. Ah, there it was. I smiled. Thank you for confirming I did the right thing. And I ended the call. No drama, just closure, and a door locking itself behind me. Revenge for some is about flames and fury. For me, it came wrapped in calm paperwork and quiet, irreversible decisions. When I walked out that door, I didn't look back. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I no longer needed to. There's a sacred kind of dignity and restraint. And if there's one thing betrayal teaches you, it's the beauty of control. Not over others, but over your own reaction. Let them call you cold. Let them say you're calculating. Because when you've spent decades being warm, patient, forgiving, and they still lit a match under your name, what's left to protect? Not long after the eviction, my lawyer sent me footage from the studio's security cameras. I watched without sound. That's how I preferred it. Images have a way of telling the truth in silence. Brandon dragging a duffel bag that looked heavier than anything he'd ever carried emotionally. Tessa, her hair in disarray, frustration stitched into every movement. They weren't yelling. They weren't angry. They looked lost. And that's when I realized I hadn't destroyed them. I simply stopped holding the pieces together. When you stop being the foundation, the roof always caves in. They were tenants in a house built on the very dreams they mocked, occupants of a chapter they never authored. I didn't need to scream to reclaim the narrative. I just needed to walk off the page. Soon, Brandon started reaching out, asking for keepsakes, family heirlooms, a few things with sentimental value. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, who replied with a clause from the lease agreement. Per Section 6.3, all items remaining on the property post-termination will be treated as unclaimed and subject to legal disposal. No drama, no confrontation, just contract law. It's funny how people suddenly value things they once ignored when they realize you have the authority to erase them from your life. The phone rang again. I didn't pick up. I sent one last message. Please direct all future communication through legal representation. I no longer hold emotional responsibility in this matter. And that was that. They had carved me out of their lives like I was dead weight. They just hadn't expected that the weight was what was holding everything upright. I didn't attend any gatherings tied to Brandon's family, not out of resentment, but because I believed in removing myself from places I was no longer cherished. But then something changed. A letter arrived, handwritten on thick ivory cardstock, the kind reserved for moments too formal to ignore. It was from his mother, Mrs. Monroe. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce. I expected judgment, silence, maybe even indirect blame. Instead, it was an invitation. Her husband's 70th birthday celebration. What caught me off guard wasn't the event, it was how the envelope was addressed. To Celia Monroe, not Celia ex wife, not plus guest, and critically, no mention of Tessa. Part of me wanted to throw it out. Another part, the one that had spent years being polite, smiling through betrayal and folding napkins at dinner parties while lies grew in the shadows, that part stood up and said, let them see who I became when they stopped looking. So I went, not to reclaim anything, not to make a scene, but because sometimes the most elegant form of closure is simply being undeniable. I wore black, understated but tailored to fit the woman I had become, disciplined, composed, luminous in my own right. Hair pinned up, a calm smile, no diamonds, just presence. And one item in my handbag, a financial summary printed on studio letterhead. I walked into the ballroom not as Celia the wife or Celia the victim. I walked in as the author of my own damn story. The venue was familiar. Crystal chandeliers, white linen floral centerpieces tilted just slightly too far left. The kind of place where everyone speaks too softly and listens too closely. I arrived precisely 10 minutes late, just enough to let my presence enter before me. People stared. Mrs. Monroe greeted me with the smile of someone used to pretending nothing had happened. Mr. Monroe gave a stiff nod. And then there was Brandon. He was standing at the side of the room, tie-loose posture, rigid. He saw me and something in him visibly faltered. Not regret, not recognition. It was fear. Tessa wasn't there. Whether by decision or by intuition, she'd chosen not to attend. Maybe she knew there are rooms that only memory will let her enter, and even memory has its boundaries. Dinner began. The food was tasteful, the wine aged. I kept my conversation light, polite. I made no references to the past. Until Mrs. Monroe, who had remained too quiet for too long, put down her knife and turned toward me. So, Celia, how have you been after everything? I could have lied, could have shrugged, given her the same courtesy she once gave my suffering. But I believe in truth, not to gloat, but because silence serves no one when it protects lies. I set down my glass, looked her straight in the eye, calm, steady. I've been well. My studio signed an animation deal this year. I oversee 3 luxury properties and manage international royalties. My current net worth is just under 3.7 million. The room stilled. The kind of silence that chokes breath but forces ears to listen. Mr. Monroe's spoon tapped his plate once, a nervous tick. Mrs. Monroe blinked slowly. You're Mara V. Hawley. I nodded. For many years now. I reached into my handbag and gently placed the folder on the table. Inside statements, contracts, valuations. Not to prove anything, but to make sure that if they continued believing the lie, it would now be a choice, not an excuse. I didn't come here for applause. I came so you'd know the woman your son left behind was never dependent. She was simply patient. Brandon sat frozen. Mrs. Monroe turned to him, her voice lower now. You said she was a burden, that she didn't earn a dime. So, where did this money come from? He didn't answer, and he didn't have to. The room spoke for him. I rose, smoothed the front of my dress. Thank you for the meal, but this is a family gathering, and I no longer belong to this family. And I left, not triumphant, just complete. Weeks passed. I didn't think of them. But one morning, an email arrived. From someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a manager at a tech firm. One Brandon had just joined. The subject line was one sentence. Is this yours? Attached was a project and AI language proposal that bore my exact 2021 format terminology and visual layout. Only one thing had changed. The name on the cover, Brandon Monroe. I wasn't surprised, not even insulted. Just ready. I opened my folder titled AI Pitch V13. Every sketch, every note, every timestamp. He'd called the idea idealistic, market fluff. Back then, he said it wouldn't sell. Apparently, it did once it had his name on it. I didn't sue. I submitted the entire file set to the company's ethics portal. No dramatic letter, just facts, evidence, quiet truth. 3 weeks later, Brandon disappeared from the company directory. No statement. Just gone. And Tessa, I hadn't intended to chase her shadow. But one day, a blog post surfaced in my search feed, an expose on a spa that had manipulated staff contracts and withheld pay. The name on the scanned form's TC, the dramatic cross on the letter T unmistakable. I didn't take action myself. I passed the documents to a writer who specialized in labor fraud and wage abuse, included anonymous testimonials, even a scanned pay stub from a former employee who had never been paid in full. 2 weeks later, the headline read, "The fraud behind the friendly face, a spa owner's trail of deception." It went viral. Former workers spoke up. The spa's website vanished. Regulators stepped in. Tessa fought back with tearful videos calling it a smear campaign. But the internet remembers. And it doesn't forget bad handwriting on bad contracts. She locked her account, rebranded under a new name, started selling handmade candles and dream catchers on a backup page. I didn't celebrate. I didn't share the post. I just turned off notifications and brewed myself tea. When people build on lies, you don't need to strike them down. You just need to walk away from the foundation. But what I didn't expect, what I never calculated was her. Arya. I never gave birth to her, but I held her when no one else showed up. When she had her first seizure, I was the one who waited through the night. When her parents were too busy, I was the one braiding her hair for picture day, fixing lunches, reading bedtime stories with voices. She started calling me Miss Celia after the divorce. The word mom disappeared like a door closed too early. I never corrected her. Love doesn't beg to be named. It simply stays. I sent cards, she replied, politely, distantly, until one day a letter came. From a law office. Voluntary guardianship transfer request. Guardian named Celia Monroe. I read it 3 times. Not to check the words. To believe them. The courtroom was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you, the kind that sharpens you. Where every breath feels magnified, every cough a thunderclap, and every second stretches long enough to hold a lifetime of hope and fear. I sat in a chair too straight, wearing a dress too formal for how I felt. Not afraid, not eager, just still. Across the room, Brandon slumped slightly in his seat, his fingers tapping the armrest as if drumming up courage that refused to arrive. Tessa had come late hair, messy eyes, hollow a tired sadness that was too practiced to be honest. She wore a faded dress and perfume that no longer hid the panic under her skin. But I didn't look at them for long. I was waiting for someone else. Then she walked in. Arya, not a child anymore. Not the same little girl who used to sneak into my studio while I painted and ask if foxes could wear crowns in books. She had grown tall. Her hair was tied neatly, her white blouse pressed, her shoes polished but simple. She didn't scan the room. She walked straight toward the center, composed like someone who had already decided what story she wanted to tell. And I didn't speak. Not yet, because I've always believed real love doesn't try to perform. It waits, it listens, it gives space for the other to arrive in their own time, not yours. Tessa's attorney started with a speech. Predictable phrases, biological mother history, emotional bond. But the words sounded as thin as the pages they were read from. Then the judge asked the only question that mattered. Arya, would you like to speak? She stood, turned toward me, and everything inside me stopped moving. Her voice was clear, not angry, not shaking, deliberate. The kind of voice that grows only in the company of someone who's been heard even in silence. I know who gave birth to me, she began, but the person who raised me, who stayed when others left, who saw me even when I tried to disappear, that person was Miss Celia. She paused. Tessa lowered her eyes. Brandon looked away. I want to live with her, Arya continued, because I want to become someone like her. No arguments followed. No rebuttals. Even the judge paused almost reverent before signing the document that made the truth official. But the truth had existed long before ink touched paper. Afterward, we didn't say much, we didn't need to. We walked out of the courthouse together, the sunlight soft against the stone steps, and just as I reached for my car door, I felt her hand in mine. She looked up at me, her eyes vulnerable but sure. From now on, can I call you Mom? I didn't answer with words. I wrapped my arms around her and held her for the first time in 3 years, not like a guess, not like a memory, but like a promise. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt what winning truly meant. Not revenge, not justice, but being chosen by someone who saw the truth, not because you demanded it, but because you lived it. Years passed, and like all storms, that chapter faded behind me. But the wind that followed, it carried something new. I was no longer just an illustrator in the margins of other people's stories. I'd become a storyteller of my own making, not just with words, but with vision, team, and legacy. 3 years after the courtroom, I was standing on a rooftop in downtown Seattle. A poster the size of a building behind me, a fox with a paintbrush in her paw, and 1,000 stars around her eyes. The tagline read, "She didn't speak with her voice. She spoke with her courage." That fox was mine. That world was mine. And the production company behind it, also mine, Nova Frame Studios. A name chosen with care, Nova for the stars we become after we burn, Frame for the moments we choose to keep. I didn't build it alone. My co-founder was Jonathan Miles, a Canadian producer with 3 Emmys and a soul so still, it made the world around him quieter. He believed in soft power and kindness over charisma in stories told with hands rather than headlines. He never asked about my past. He never treated my silence like a mystery to be solved. He just stood beside me, steady, warm, unassuming. One evening after a private screening, we lingered under the lights while the credits rolled in gold letters across the screen. He turned toward me and said, not with pressure, but with presence, "If you ever decide to stop running, I'd like to be the person you lean on." I smiled, not because I hadn't waited for those words, but because I had stopped needing them. Jonathan, I don't need someone to complete me. I just want someone who walks beside me. He nodded, not disappointed, not discouraged. He simply offered his presence. And that was enough. Sometimes that's the most sacred kind of love, the one that doesn't press, doesn't promise. It just stays. Our film premiered at a grand theater, but that wasn't the part that mattered most. The real premiere, it was a private event. No celebrities, no sponsors, just children. Children from refugee camps, boarding schools, underfunded art centers, kids who had never been to a movie theater in their lives. We filled every seat, gave out popcorn sketchbooks, tiny plush foxes. And when the lights dimmed, I stood on stage not as Celia, the ex-wife or the betrayed or even the studio founder. I stood as the girl I once was, the one who thought she was invisible. And I told a story, not a speech, just a few words, about a little girl who felt lost in a world too big, until she picked up a pencil and began to redraw her life. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. When I stepped off the stage, I saw Arya in the front row. Her eyes glowed. Not with tears, but with pride. And I knew I hadn't just rewritten my own ending. I'd rewritten a beginning for someone else to stand on. Tessa never fully reappeared. She drifted through the corners of the internet selling craft kits and reposting old quotes. She made herself small, then loud, then invisible again. Brandon, a mutual friend, once messaged me. Said he saw him at a city bus terminal wearing a shirt too wrinkled for someone who once obsessed over appearances. Delivering for an app that didn't check resumes. No name on his mailbox anymore. just silence. But I didn't hate them. Not anymore, because hate is a leash. And I'd already set myself free. They didn't fall because I pushed them. They fell because they built their lives on scaffolding made of my silence. And when I walked away, the wind simply did the rest. Today, I work in a glass walled studio where children's voices echo down the hallways. We animate stories not for attention, but for impact. We build characters that teach kindness without speeches, courage without violence, hope without sugarcoating. And every so often, a child sends me a letter, sometimes scribbled in crayon, sometimes typed by a school assistant. They say things like, "The fox is my friend," or "When I feel scared, I draw her and I feel strong." I read every one because those letters remind me of what I almost let die in myself and what I saved simply by refusing to give up on who I truly was. People still ask me, "Why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you show them sooner?" And I answer the same way every time. Because some people don't deserve the front row seat to your blooming. Some people only recognize the garden after the gate is closed. I never needed their permission to grow. I just needed them gone long enough for the roots to breathe. There's a kind of power most people never notice. It doesn't speak in boardrooms. It doesn't shout over applause. It doesn't break glasses when it's angry or threaten to leave when it's hurt. It simply remains in the room, in the memory, in the heart of someone who needed it. That was the kind of power I wanted to be. Not the storm, but the one standing still while the storm passed through her. I didn't set out to become anything. Not a studio founder, not an icon for resilience, not even a mother. I only wanted to live a life that made sense, one built from what I loved, not what I feared losing. But sometimes when you live with enough quiet intention, people start listening to the silence. Arya grew into herself slowly, not like fireworks, like sunlight, gentle, steady, filling the room one corner at a time. She never asked for big things, but I gave them anyway, not material gifts, but space, trust, time. She painted with me in the evenings, sometimes in silence. Other times while humming songs she didn't know I remembered from when she was little. We didn't talk much about her parents. Not because I told her not to, but because she didn't need to. Grief, when it's deep, doesn't require words, it just wants to be held. And every time she walked past the doorway to my office and paused, I knew she was checking to see if I was still there. I always was. Not because I had to be, because I chose to be. One spring afternoon, I found her sitting at the end of the garden sketchbook in her lap, sunlight slanting across her shoulder. She was drawing the fox, the same one that had once saved me. But this time, the fox was different, older, wiser. Eyes softer, tail longer, coat grayer at the edges. "What's she doing?" I asked, gently sitting beside her. "She's watching over someone," Arya said without looking up. "But from far away? Like, she knows the person will be okay, but she's still close, just in case." I swallowed. "That's beautiful." Arya smiled, then finally looked up. "Is that what you've always done for me?" I didn't answer. I just reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away. She leaned in. Years passed like pages in a novel I wasn't rushing to finish. I traveled but always came home. I dated but never felt the need to remarry. I spoke at conferences, taught classes, funded scholarships for young girls in underfunded schools who dreamed of drawing stories that hadn't been written yet. But I didn't become famous. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to never again shrink for someone who preferred a quieter version of me. And that I had achieved. One fall evening, Arya knocked on my door holding 2 cups of cocoa. Her nails were painted in little clouds. She sat across from me, unusually quiet. "I want to tell you something," she said. I looked up. She reached into her backpack and pulled out an envelope. Handwritten. Stamped with a seal I recognized immediately. University of Edinburgh. My breath caught. She'd never told me she applied. I opened it slowly. "Dear Arya Caldwell, we are pleased to inform you." The words blurred. I smiled. She was going to Scotland to study literature and visual storytelling, to chase her own version of the fox. The night before her flight, she came to my room. No bags in hand, no list of things forgotten, just her, and a quiet question. "Will you be okay?" I laughed gently. "You're the one flying across the ocean." I know, she said, but somehow I feel like I'm the one leaving something behind. I walked her to the window, the city lights blinking in the distance. You're not leaving anything, I said. You're carrying it forward. She nodded, then paused. I think I want to write about you. I blinked. Me? She smiled a little shy for the first time in years. Not directly, but maybe a character. A woman who builds something no one notices until they can't stop seeing it. I swallowed. And what does she do? Arya looked out the window again. She teaches others how to stand, not by lifting them, but by reminding them they've had legs all along. I closed my eyes. Let the silence hold us. This wasn't a goodbye. This was an inheritance. 2 months later, I received a postcard. On the front, a painted image of the North Sea, cold, vast, honest. On the back, Mom the Fox is doing well. She started writing her own stories now. Not always happy ones, but brave ones. Thank you for helping her learn the language of courage. No signature, just a little drawing. A fox, and beside it, a small, almost hidden heart. I still walk past the old studio sometimes. The one Brandon and Tessa once thought belonged to them. It's an art therapy space now filled with young women rebuilding their lives through brushstrokes and poetry. I donated it to a nonprofit in Arya's name. No plaques, no speeches, just a small note on the inside door. Some spaces are not meant to be owned, only protected until they're ready to become something better. Brandon still sends emails sometimes. Most go unread. Once he sent a photo of a drawing Arya had made when she was 7. It was bent at the corners, faded but intact. He wrote, I didn't see it then. I think I do now. She drew the fox with your eyes. I didn't reply. Some acknowledgments arrived too late to be useful. But I did save the image, not for him, for Arya. So one day when she doubts who she is, I can show her who she's always been. Tessa never reached out again. She vanished into the corners of the internet where people go to be forgotten quietly. I don't search for her. I don't hope for her redemption. Some people don't need a villain to defeat, just the absence of an enabler. I don't wish her harm. But I no longer make space for her in my life. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself move forward without dragging their name behind you. And me, I still write, still draw, still walk into rooms where I'm not the loudest or the flashiest, but always, always the most unshakable. My new book releases this fall. It's called The Quiet Architect. It's about a girl who thought her life had collapsed when she lost everything, until she realized she had just been given land. Land no one else could claim. Land where she could finally build something that lasted. People ask me sometimes what I learned from it all, and I tell them this. Never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose, because she won't come for you with fury. She'll come with facts, with contracts, with an empire signed in her own name, and she won't announce her arrival. She'll simply own the space the moment you realize it was always hers to begin with. There is no revenge greater than survival, no victory more poetic than peace, and no legacy more powerful than being remembered not for what you destroyed, but for what you dared to create when no one believed in you but yourself.